So we don't want an emperor. Our countries are sovereign. I think it's irresponsible for a president from a country like the US to threaten the world with tariffs on social media.
If they're in BRICS, because BRICS was set up to hurt us. BRICS was set up to degenerate our dollar and take our dollar as the standard. Anybody that's in BRICS is getting a 10% charge.
There's any policy on our part to replace the dollar. As I said, at the end of the day, the dollar as the reserve currency is the source of international economic stability.
Welcome to GVS Deep Dive. I'm Najma Minhas. Trump says that the BRICS group is trying to destroy the United States dollar, and now he's slapping them with 10% tariffs. But here's the twist. The more he threatens, the more powerful BRICS seems to become. So is he, the emperor, actually fueling the very rebellion that he fears? Donald Trump is angry. He posted on Truth Social on Sunday, July the 6th, that any country aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of BRICS will be charged an additional 10% tariff. There will be no exceptions to this policy. Thank you for your attention to this matter. He reiterated this message again on July the 8th during a cabinet meeting in response to a question by a reporter. And he emphasized that BRICS nations, including India, would face a 10% tariff due to their membership in the Bloc, which he claimed was trying to destroy the dollar. He said that BRICS is getting 10% charge pretty soon and added, they, India, will certainly have to pay 10% if they are in BRICS, because BRICS was set up to hurt us, to degenerate our dollar. The dollar is king. We are going to keep it that way. He also confirmed that more letters would be going out to the remaining United States trading partners, detailing their tariff rates, with tariffs set to take place on August the 1st, 2025 for countries without trade agreements. He posted later on Truth Social that the 1st of August was the final date. Tariffs will start being paid on August 1, 2025, he wrote. There has been no change to this date, and there will be no change. Trump's statements came during the BRICS summit in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, which began on July the 6th, 2025. The BRICS bloc issued a 31-page joint statement criticizing the unilateral tariffs, implicitly targeting Trump's policies, and expressed concerns about their impact on global trade. The group did also discuss initiatives like trading in local currencies, developing alternatives to Western financial systems such as the BRICS Pay and BRICS Bridge, and they condemned military strikes on Iran without naming the United States or Israel. It was this tenuous criticism that no doubt triggered Trump to make these comments, and then for him to spontaneously decide that he's going to impose those tariffs on BRICS members. It's not the first time that he's threatened them. Every time a summit happens, or they even appear in the news, Trump smashes out an angry post or comment about the group. However, because this is Trump, we don't know whether the BRICS tariffs will be additional tariffs on existing rates set, like he said, or those additional tariffs which are going to be on top of those which have been agreed with nations so far, whether these will be on BRICS members only, or will they also be set on BRICS partner members? Will they go into effect, and when will they be going into effect? Or whether Trump will taco again. But what probably really ignited Trump's response would have been the dollar's decline that everyone's been discussing the past 1 week. The dollar's decline in the first half of this year, around 10%, is the most in the past 4 decades. Do check out my vlog on this issue next. I will put a link in the description below as well. Trump believes in a strong dollar, reflecting the American hegemonic role and the primacy in the global arena. And he's not happy to see a weaker dollar on his watch. Now, these comments on the BRICS nations and the tariffs that he's going to impose were not off-the-cuff remarks by him, as later the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt reinforced Trump's position, stating that he was closely monitoring the BRICS summit and that he viewed the bloc as attempting to undermine US interests. Earlier in June, he had warned that if countries replaced the US dollar as a reserve currency, he would impose a 100% tariff. He first made this threat after winning election last year in November. The month before that, a report which was prepared by the Russians for the BRICS summit that was happening in October had called for the dollar's central role in the financial system to be reassessed. The idea that the BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch is over, Trump warned. We require a commitment from these countries that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs and should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy. Things are not going very well for Trump. Remember, he told us on Liberation Day on April the 2nd that countries were lining up to kiss his ass to make trade deals.
I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, sir, make a deal.
Well, it seems that they didn't turn up to that party. The US has so far only signed 2 trade agreements, one with the United Kingdom and one with Vietnam, and both account for around 2.8% of US trade each. The Pakistani press are talking about a trade deal to be announced imminently. But before you get too excited by trade number 3, Pakistan is equivalent to 0.13% of US trade. A preliminary one may be on the cards to be signed with India also, which by the way only accounts for another 1.8% of US trade. The Trump administration has not been able to make any deal with its major trading partners, Mexico, Canada, and China. Mexico is the United States' single largest trade partner at 15% of US trade, followed by Canada at 14%, and then China 10%. Japan just got a letter informing it that it will now have tariffs of 25%, which are in fact higher than the 24% that were imposed on the country on Liberation Day. Most importantly, it was one of the first countries to start negotiating with the Trump administration over tariffs and has still not been able to come to any agreement. The main issue there is the auto sector, which is a huge income and employment generator for Japan, on which the United States has imposed 25% tariffs in addition to the reciprocal tariffs. Now, Trump's upset that the Japanese are not buying more American cars. We all know that the Japanese produce amongst the best mass market cars, Toyota, Hyundai, which are actually number 3 and number 4 in the US market also. What's hurting the Japanese negotiating power, however, is that many of their automakers already shifted much of their US-based car production to the United States during Trump's first administration, when he set tariff threats then to Japan as well. So how do you make Trump happy this time round? The Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba has said that the latest tariff announcement was truly regrettable. But who will tell the emperor that he's not wearing any clothes? Threatening major global south sovereign countries for belonging to a bloc isn't going to go down very well. And this is no longer the 1990s or the 2000s era of the United States hyperpower. Both China and Russia responded to Trump's initial post cautiously. They were hoping to keep it low-key. Maybe the threat would disappear.
Shared our view on the BRICS mechanism. We believe that BRICS is a positive force in the international community. Its cooperation is open and inclusive, and not targeted at any particular country.
A spokesperson for the Russian President Vladimir Putin said that collaboration within the alliance was not directed against third countries. The more Trump shouts, the more the world starts to tune him out. It's not strength. It's a signal that the US actually is feeling cornered. The former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who has started to become an anti-Trump troll, posted on X, "BRICS is gaining authority. Trump announced that an additional 10% tariff would be imposed on any country that supports BRICS policy. So we're doing everything right." This isn't just China and Russia. BRICS now includes oil giants, the UAE and Iran, African powerhouses like Egypt and Ethiopia, Southeast Asian leaders like Indonesia and Vietnam, and democratic heavyweights like India and Brazil. The group now has over 11 countries, having grown from the original 4 in 2009. BRICS was a term that was coined at the time by Goldman Sachs paper, Brazil, Russia, India, China. South Africa joined in 2010. Then they were joined by Egypt, Iran, and Ethiopia and the UAE in 2024. And in 2025, this year, they've been joined by Indonesia, and then June, literally a couple of weeks back, by Vietnam. The Bloc's growing economic cloud, with 39% of global GDP and having 45% of the world population, they're increasingly trading with each other. Trade between the BRICS countries has reached a record high of over $740 billion in 2024. And depending on the country, but an increasing large amount of that trade is being done in local currencies between the countries. They don't see it as being anti-Americanism. They see it as about risk-proofing their economies. And with each threat that Trump gives them, it gives them the perfect justification. BRICS nations see themselves as representing a push for a multipolar world, which of course is challenging the US-dominated unipolar order. Both India and Brazil's Lula have likened the BRICS to the non-aligned movement and describe it as emphasizing sovereignty and development over confrontation with the West. Trump's recent comments have annoyed President Lula of Brazil, who hosted the recent BRICS summit in Rio. And he's fired back at Mr. Trump's initial post, saying that we don't want an emperor. We are sovereign nations. President Lula also told reporters that if he thinks he can tax countries, well, they also have the right to tax too. Now, instead of isolating China or Russia, Trump is actually alienating India, Brazil, South Africa, nations that the United States desperately needs for what it wants as its strategic balance against China. But instead, whether it's India, Egypt, UAE, all the US partners, they're all hedging because of Trump's threats. And that only weakens US alliances. Framing BRICS as a threat may go down very well with Trump's domestic supporters. He's trying to reinforce his image as that defender of US economic interests. But whether the global South sees it in the same way, of course, is not the case. They view BRICS as a legitimate platform for building a multipolar world order. But since Donald Trump treats every problem like a nail, his instinct is always to reach for the hammer. This blunt force approach is basically backfiring. Rather than isolating BRICS, it's weakening United States soft power, inadvertently driving more countries, especially in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, towards the very alliance that Washington seeks to contain. BRICS has often been dismissed as little more than a symbolic alliance, a global science talking shop without real teeth. And that's true to much of an extent. I mean, look at what they did on Iran, or rather, what they didn't do. But what is changing is that when the West keeps overplaying its hand, the BRICS nations more and more think about how to improve their own safety. At the most recent BRICS summit, a quiet but powerful proposal was put on the table, a grain trading exchange. Now, this was led by Russia and designed to bypass Western commodities market. On paper, it's just about agriculture, but in reality, it's about control. Control over pricing, trade flows, and ultimately currency. The exchange may start with grain, but it's built to expand. Soy, rice, maybe even energy in the future. The goal? Reduce dependency on the US dollar and US markets. Remember the Chicago Commodity Exchange, one of the largest places where grain and other commodities are priced and exchanged. What the BRICS nations want to do is deepen the trade ties within the BRICS bloc. And Trump now using the trade as a weapon, in essence what he's doing is he's pushing others to build these walls much faster. Once built, these won't be temporary measures any longer. Over time, they become permanent architecture of how people trade. And it's one more step towards that multipolar trade system where the global South isn't just saying, I want a seat on the table. They're actually leading the initiatives and creating the table. There's no doubt that the US dollar status as the world's reserve currency underpins American economic power. It facilitates their lower borrowing costs, global trade influence, and even that ability to impose sanctions. However, coercive tariffs will ultimately backfire by accelerating de-dollarization, as nations like Russia and China will obviously seek alternatives to avoid the US financial leverage. When countries trade without the US dollar, using local currencies or setting up new financial systems, that's de-dollarization. It weakens America's ability to impose sanctions, raise cheap debt, and control that global finance. However, exactly the use of sanctions and the threats of taking away, for example, country reserves and so on, that have been increasingly used by the West since 2022, is encouraging the BRICS nations to increasingly think about setting up their own currency and these alternative trading systems. Something Trump himself used to understand when he said that sanctions were not a good idea in the long run. Now, Trump may be hoping that that 10% tariff threat will strengthen the US negotiating position in trade talks and pressurizing some of those BRICS and the aligned nations to make concessions quickly before the August 1st, 2025 deadline. And to some extent, it may work on countries like India, who's already trying to straddle between the BRICS countries and keeping the US happy, and who, among other things, US is supporting it to become a regional strong player in its own anti-China game. India, of course, is going along for its own reasons. India has been one of the key countries that has resisted increasing the membership of BRICS, and this is why BRICS now has a number of what they now call the partner countries, rather than member countries. India has also been against creating a united BRICS currency. However, it has recently cautiously welcomed the use of bilateral currencies for some trade. Now, Donald Trump's also hoping that the long list of countries from Turkey to Cambodia, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and so on that have shown a keen interest in becoming BRICS members will now drop out because of the fear of the United States threat, weakening the group's role as the primary spokesperson of the global south. But the US dollar's weakness is being driven by many factors, and as it weakens further, it will only accelerate that multipolar environment that the world is in right now. BRICS isn't fighting a war, it's building an alternative. Trump keeps mistaking rejection of American dominance for hostility, and that's a strategic misread, which will result in exactly what the US is fearing. Thank you for giving me your time again today. Do share with me your thoughts and have a great day.